excited to talk and hear from this next speaker, and I think you will be as well. Johnny Gray really doesn't need any introduction. If you're in the design and understanding some of the bigger thoughts in the space of the past couple decades, Johnny has been been contributing and been part of the conversation for so long. Johnny, how are you doing today?
I'm really good. The sun is shining, and I've got some nice ideas to share with you guys. So,
all right, I'm going to get out of the way, Johnny, and I'm going to let you get at it.
I will. I'll get right now. First of all, a big thank you to Rachel. And whenever I get to San Francisco, I always try to make it to the IDEO offices because they've always got interesting things to share. In fact, there's a few little slides here that will link up very nicely with what Rachel's saying. So, okay, let's share screen now. So tell me, have you got my, okay, you've got, I'm going to start now from the beginning, I hope. Can you see my screen, Mike? Is that okay?
Yeah, it looks good. Ready to go?
Good. Okay, so designing kitchens sustainably. This is not an obvious thing to do, and I don't want to talk today about materials. I'm more interested in talking about the ideas around how we live and how we make a good future for ourselves. Now, the patron saint, in my opinion, or the honorary godfather of kitchen design, of the kitchen, is Professor Richard Wrangham, who's now, I think, at Harvard. He's professor of psychology at Oxford when he wrote this book. He talks about how cooking made us human. And I don't know how many of you have read this, but if you haven't, it's a great weekend read. And it's extraordinary. He tells us that our bodies, the shapes of our bodies have changed as a result of cooking. Our brains have got bigger, our bodies have got smaller, but in particular, our social habits have changed. So pair bonding, he puts down to cooking. And I love that. I think that's a terrific start about why cooking and kitchens are important and we're sort of hardwired into them. Now, there's a book that's just out right now. You guys in the States have got this. Sadly, mine's still about to come through. This is Delicious by Rob Dunn and Monica Sanchez. And I'm really excited by this book because it takes Richard Wrangham's ideas about flavor playing a key role in why we started to cook more seriously and how it has an effect on the development of tools and innovation. We even got rid of predators by cooking, apparently. So he's a professor of applied ecology at North Carolina State University, and he says, cooked food tastes more delicious than uncooked food, and that's why we continue to do it. But it's not just because roots and meat were easier and safer to digest, but because of flavor. And and in my opinion, it's an easy way to please others. So showing love and care is really, it's one of the opportunities in our daily lives where we can do this. And that's why making pasta in the picture opposite is so prescient. I mean, how ridiculous to spend an hour and a half making pasta like this with some beautiful pictures on them. So, but we do it because because it gives us pleasure and because we communicate with each other in unspoken ways. So the kitchen is the place where we live. And also, interestingly, it houses memories for us. Having worked with neuroscientists for about the last 10 to 15 years, I've realized that quite a lot of the, when you want to recall a memory, you go back to where you had it in the first place. And in my case, a lot of my memories came from an early kitchen, a very primitive early kitchen in Kensington in London, which I wouldn't want to go back to, but my mother is there for me. And there are kitchens and kitchens, and this one on the left here, grand space. Somebody just basically comes in and puts some shelves up, builds an instant kitchen. And then when we get rich and successful and powerful, we want a designer kitchen of our own. And it's just worth remembering that a kitchen costs more than a car. And its design affects how we use it just in the same way. But do we get the same kind of level of design in the kitchen? That's a question to answer. So when I look at my own kitchen, I often think this makes me smile because I quite like clutter. I don't necessarily like mess, but I like paraphernalia. All these words are quite useful. And I think it's worth remembering that modern marketing sold fitted kitchens or continuous counter kitchens based on hygiene and cleanliness because they were making money out of soap powder advertising in the 50s and 60s. And that's where quite a lot of kitchen design, I think, went wrong. It got divorced from the kind of the coziness and the comfort that we really want from our homes. And Daniel Miller here is a wonderful writer. I thoroughly recommend this book called Stuff, where he starts to explore about how material things really make an impact on our emotional lives. And in particular, I wanted to mention to you that for those who are forced to go into a care home because they can't cook and eat for themselves in their own kitchens, their life expectancy is around about 4 months. In other words, when you leave your home, the psychological trauma of all the things that were inside your home have gone, and they don't support you anymore. So here's the ultimate kind of, how to put it, picture in my mind of, I learned to drive on this Rolls Royce. This was my dad's, and my brother made a film called A Romantic Road when he took this Rolls around India. And here he is sailing up the Brahmaputra, and I can say you'd be very worried about the car's going to fall off, but luckily the boat's very long and thin, so it's quite safe. And he uses the inside of the Rolls at the back particularly to have his picnics and his houses. And my father bought the car because he had far too many children. There were 5 of us, and he couldn't find a conventional car to fit in children and his 5 dogs and the dogs. But the reason I'm really showing you this picture is because Rolls Royces, very roughly, are going up in terms of their life expectancy. Roughly 95% of them are still on the road. And the average life of a car in the UK is about 13.9 years. So there's an interesting lesson there. And I want to quote Rachel Carson, the ecologist, who says, "The more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe, the less taste we will have for its destruction. In particular, in the end, we conserve only what we love." So this guy here, Jonathan Chapman, writes this book. He's now at Harvard. He was at Brighton University, about how if we create objects that have emotional durability, they last. Now, the complement to this is The Shape of Green, which is the work by a terrific book written about 8 years ago by Lance Hosey. It's still, I think, worth a read. It's still on the money in terms of, he gets this idea that beauty is a key part of behavioral change, a bit like what Rachel was saying a bit earlier. We can't just talk about sustainable materials or less energy. We have to talk about something aspirational, something that really means something to us. So sustainability should have a style, but it shouldn't become one. And beauty and the senses are what brains and emotions are tuned into. That's what they trigger pleasure, but they also trigger belonging and the promise of happiness. And that's one of the things that designers have got to help do. So here is the philosophy now that designers use for creating a much more sustainable environment and more sustainable kitchens. And it's called biophilic design. And this is based on the book written by Edward O. Wilson, an American psychologist who wrote Biophilia in 1984. And a lot of the design movement have taken his key ideas. And there's a lovely quote here: "Love of life and all that is alive in the natural environment through the use of nature and indirect nature and space and place conditions, whether a person, a plant or an idea, is really all about what we can create for homes of the future." It creates a sense of home, and homes which have got access and views of nature are always worth more money too. So anyway, on the left side, I just listed some of the key things. Now, you expect these to be something that happens anyway, but in kitchen design, unfortunately, a lot of these things don't really happen. But air quality, acoustics, all these things, they really matter. I was saying earlier, I've worked with neuroscientists, and these are some of the instinctive ideas that I've taken to be actual sort of design concepts. So one of the key things I do when I design a kitchen, it always starts with eye contact. I want people using the kitchen to see into the center of the room. I want them to have long views out of a window. This immediately makes them locate themselves well in the place. And also, we need to have places to stop and perch so that people are welcome. And then there's just the nice things about handmade objects and cherry decor. They really help you want to stay in the kitchen. So what does the future kitchen look like? Well, in my opinion, it's all to do with much simpler planning, less clutter, less furniture around the actual walls, like wall-based cabinetry, and maybe a pantry to take the pressure off that. And then we just want space and light. Now, luckily, there's a number of trends and technologies that are happening which really will work well with that. And this thing, distributed surfaces, it's all about using wireless countertops. And we're on the verge of a revolution here. So I hope we can, actually, I'm talking to the Wireless Consortium in the next month. And if anybody's interested, do please contact me afterwards. So this is a kitchen where there's 5 different work surfaces. And the one on the left is known as a teenager's bar. It's like a kind of little pub. But what I really wanted to say to you is, if you design the kitchen in a compact way, you have space left over for what I call social furniture. Really good way of making a kitchen friendly and sociable. Now, here's some work from Brighton University, different professor this time. This is a guy called Duncan Baker Brown. And they build this house completely out of the things I've shown you on this slide. There are 19,800 toothbrushes from Virgin Airways not used up in the airline packages in this house. And what he's basically saying here is, this is stuff in the wrong place. And I mean, it's simplistic, but I love that as an idea. But the outcome of that, he says, is that we need to make things, design things that have components so they can be replaced, obviously, so they can be repurposed and modular. So I think there's a very interesting future about modular kitchens. Now, I invented this concept called the unfitted kitchen in the mid-80s, and it was seen as a traditional way of furnishing a room, but with hidden and sophisticated, but quite low-key ergonomics. And I think we're ready for that, particularly thinking about Rachel's last, her point about how we need to communicate with people in such a way that we can change their behavior. And I think this is working with people's natural behavior to make themselves homely, which is to furnish a room. So kitchen, as Rachel has said, it moves from product design now towards experience. And the phrase I use, which I may have even borrowed from Idea, Rachel, I apologize if it's the case, that design is really a verb, not a noun. And how do we use tech? So I've been looking at this with all the conversations I've had with Mike and so on. And there's some really interesting developments. On the top left is a company called Eurocarer, who are doing the first of the wireless countertops, which I'm beginning to install in the UK. But what we use here for how do we use technology? Well, rather like Rachel was saying, I like her phrase nudge. We try to nudge people towards certain kinds of behavior. But I'm particularly interested in gourmet cooking and precision. I think there's another role for tech there, particularly with the Nova and with the Heston Q devices. And also in my work with multi-generational design, there's a role for safety. I mean, why are we still burning food? We don't need to. Why are people still burning their hands? They don't need to. I think we've got a really interesting future in those directions. And this is my own interest in low tech. I have one of these things called a Wonder Bag. I make my porridge in the winter, and you cook the porridge for about 3 minutes, put the lid on, wrap the bag around it, put the kind of soft top in, and an hour later you've got the most perfect porridge, and it's used almost no energy. So that whole idea of slow food movement, I'd like it to enter more into our thinking about how we use tech. This is a title of a Royal Society of Arts brief I set students basically students from around the world did this about 2 or 3 years ago. We had a really good response. We had about 1,000 students from 30 different universities. These are some of the key things that I would recommend about offering to customers very simple ways of improving your sort of sensual pleasure of food. I mean, fermenting is obviously one, and the incredible work of Sandor Katz. But small things like growing herbs, having a shelf or a spot in the kitchen when the food that you've cooked is visible to everybody before the meal, and then a dresser or a hutch where you can have bowls of food before you eat them. Everything doesn't have to go into the fridge all the time. So we need to take back control a little bit, given the Brexit nonsense that we've all been experiencing. What I really like people to think about is taking back more making skills. And I think we are completely ready for this. With lockdown, there's been a huge interest in DIY and the programs that go around it. And in our own particular area where we're talking about kitchen design and kitchen making, we really do need to have better design training. And I'm involved in setting up the first apprenticeship degree in the UK for getting a proper profession of kitchen design set up. And lastly, or towards the end of this is just my own recent work. This is the multi-generational kitchen we've been working on up at the National Innovation Centre for Aging for the last 4 years. It's now on display up in Newcastle. Very sadly, the only people who regularly see it are the cleaners. The Prime Minister was going to open it, and then it was going to be Prince Charles, and now we laughingly say it's the cleaners. But they love touching it, they like stroking it, and it's too long to go into now. But if anybody's interested in this kitchen, it is designed for all generations to use with multiple abilities without any form of stigmatism. So what am I trying to really do with the kitchen here? How are we going to try and make it more sustainable? Well, I want it to be a space for everyone all the time. Sorry, it's a bit of a cliche. It's the famous song by the Eagles, but I love the spirit of that. Visible food and utensils, dedicated spots for where you can do homework and leisure without getting in the way of cooking. And it's a space that should welcome children, adults, teenagers, and the rest of the family. So that's my kind of prompt for how we can help make the kitchen more sustainable. I'm very happy to answer any questions. Thank you for listening.
Johnny, as always, that was great. We don't have much time left, but real quickly, if you have a quick answer, technology seems like it's ever more on your mind, and it seems like you think it's going to play a big role in kitchen design.
Yes, I think in the behavioural aspects, absolutely yes. There's a really lovely word which I use mostly for my students, but I'd like it to become a more popular word. It's called affordance, and this is the idea that when you make an offer of something, it's a medieval word that people used for shelves. If you put a shelf out there, people use it. So that's how we can nudge the future. Now, particularly, we can do it with technology, because we've got a lot of ways of prompting people now to use things more, as I say, with much more scope than we had. And a classic one right now, I just made a video for Kuka, which is this boiling hot water tap. You know, a friend of mine who's in a wheelchair had a terrible accident before Christmas when he poured an entire kettle on himself. Now, all he needs right now is to have a little bit more support. If he had a Kuka, for example, he wouldn't have burnt himself. So if we can find other ways of making things safer, and I think we can, I'd be very interested to talk to anybody. And of course, the big excitement is cordless appliances.
Yep. All right, Johnny. If people want to get hold of Johnny, feel free to message with him in the chat. That's all the time we have for now. We're going to be right back with the next session, a panel wrapping up this conversation about design and sustainability.